Wow. Thank you so much for being here today. They'll do anything to skip class. I observe here that this particular service is composed of some of the smartest people in Indiana today. Because you didn't come to the 7:30 service this morning, did you? Right. So this is good. And I can say that we've gotten to know each other a little bit over on this side. I wish I could get to know you, but we're just going to do some of the same old, because we're in the story. And your preacher, Daryl, he's been preaching the story. And that's exactly what we're going to continue today. Our focus will be on the first 13 chapters of Samuel, primarily. And so if you've not read them before you've come, please do so as you return home today and read those first 13 chapters to make a little bit of sense out of what we will discuss today. I like a story because, behind every story there is a face and a name. And the stories have real value, but the real issue is in the face and the name. What is your name? The story today, those first 13 chapters, have some interesting names, if you will. And then you can even begin to picture some of the faces that are connected there too. For example, there is Hannah, and she by name is a gracious person, a graceful, charming person. So you can kind of get an image of what she looks like just by what her name means. And you've got Elkanah, her husband. And Elkanah means, very basic, that he has a zeal for God. I love that. It's kind of like listening to this music. You can tell the young people here that they've got a zeal for God in the way they sing. I've been to some church services where it's more like a funeral. This was alive. This was vibrant. This was zealous, if you will. And that's Elkanah. He has a zeal for God. But then there's also a character named Eli. He's a priest. He has two sons, Hophni and that first son, Hophni. His name means tadpole. How'd you like to have that? Yeah, we named our son Hophni because it means tadpole. Or you've got Phineas, which I suppose there's some history here. Phineas basically means the Negro. So there may be something within that family story that hasn't been told. And then you could go on and look at names. For example, the young people that are over here. I shouldn't call you young people. You're students. You're adults. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, one of my favorite names is Court. Do we have a Court in this crowd? Cord with a D. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. See by the smile on his face, you know what Cord means? Choir clown. And I understand that fits most appropriately over here, so we'll just continue to see how, in the context of life, names have meaning. Does that make sense to you? My name is Danny. Now, some people don't think that that's very professional, but that's my name. It's not Daniel. So I was in college like these students when reading through the book of Daniel, it just finally dawned on me after so many years. Why did my mother name me Danny? Why not Daniel? That's biblical. So I decided to call her. And at that stage, she's in the second to third stage of Alzheimer's. Memory's not always there, so I figured I better get as much info as I can as soon as possible. And mornings are always best, you understand, in those circumstances. And so I said, Mom, tell me why you name me Danny and not Daniel. And so off she goes. She says, I love my horse. My horse was saving my life. I was going to school one morning. It was raining torrents. And as we crossed this little bridge, the water swept across and hit our buggy. And the buggy was off in the little creek. Is it creek or what do you say here? Creek or crick? And she said, this horse just turned. I said, Mom, that's a great story. But why did you name me Danny? She said this horse was so good, just churned and it just kicked, and it finally got our buggy back up on the road, and we arrived at school safely. I said, that's a great story. But why'd you name me Dan? Well, my horse was named Dan. And in that condition, I couldn't say a whole lot, but nonetheless, let me just simply say, some of our stories and even our names have stories. Some are flattering, some are not so helpful. I love names. I love to meet people. I go to a bank in Manchester, New Hampshire. That's what we say. And I love to walk in there because across the bank there's a lady named Jenny. As soon as I walk in, she says, "Hi, Dan, good to see you today." And then there are 3 or 4 tellers over here, and there's Bobby. And Bobby is single, and he's a good-looking dude. And you know who the other 3, they're the single tellers up and down that row. You can see the excitement as they all keep looking at Bobby. And there's Melissa, and there's Bridget, and there's Jen. And they like working at this bank. Because they really like Bobby. And they'll all just say, "Hi, Dan, good to see you today. How can we help you?" I like to learn their names because, along the way, sometimes there's a story. There's another teller at that bank named Melissa. Melissa was married. Melissa now has been married 3 times. And I don't know all the details, but I know that her first husband has custody of the children. And God's given me an opportunity to kind of speak into Melissa's life because there are times when I'm there and you can just see the pain in her eyes. And even in a moment, you can see the tears welling. She says, "I couldn't see the children this weekend." You see, every face has a name, and every name has a story. And it's true when it comes to this story in 1 Samuel. Because there's some people here that you need to meet. If you've not gotten to know them before, let me introduce them to you for a moment. Of course, you've got Elkanah and Hannah. He loves Hannah. I have to tell you, he has 2 wives, and Hannah was the first. And he took a second only because Hannah seemed to be barren, and having children, namesake, was part of the culture, so the second wife was approved. And the second wife here has many children. And she just rubbed it in the face of Hannah, if she could, that she was the one who had Elkanah's children, Hannah, barren. Hannah went and she prayed in the synagogue. She prayed before the priest many, many times, and she would say, I am your servant, Lord, if you would just honor me by granting me a son here in this discussion. Grant unto me a son, and I will give him to you, and he will serve you all of his life. And God honored her prayer. You see, she's a praying woman. Her name's Hannah. She's the gracious, graceful, charming woman. But she wanted to honor God. She wanted to honor her husband by bearing a son to carry on the family name. And God blessed them, and there was a son born, and she was true to her word. We're not always faithful to God that way. God, if you get me out of this mess, I promise you I'll be faithful next time. And sometimes the next time comes, and it's the same story. But when he was weaned, Samuel, the son, was taken to the synagogue and there given to Eli the priest. And there to be raised in the context of teaching and instruction and serving and all of his life, that was Samuel. He was faithful unto God. And what we find from those first 13 chapters was Samuel so much like his mother. Worship and prayer and fasting and service. And of course, when he was dedicated, Hannah said, no razor will touch his hair. He will drink no wine or strong drink. And that Nazirite vow went with him for the rest of his life. He was faithful in serving our God. This is a praying mother. She made a difference in the world. I could say that about my own mother, who named me after her horse. She was a praying fool. And she prayed for me continuously. And she prayed that I would honor God and I'd be faithful to Him. And I failed God and her many, many times, but she never stopped praying. Understand, don't stop praying. God will make the difference. That's the story of Hannah. She's a praying mother. But there's an interesting twist in these chapters. For there's a priest named Eli. And Eli is one of those religious leaders that somehow gets confused about his religion. There's something about Eli that communicates if you just sacrifice regularly, if you give faithfully, if you're serving continuously, that in the process you are really right with God. But Eli proves that not to be true. For Eli has two sons. Those sons grow up to be a religious leader just like him. They're in the priestly service, but you go on and read in those chapters and it's not a good story. For Hophni and his brother, they're scoundrels. When sacrifices are made, they take the best portions for themselves. They're sexually unfaithful even to the people who were serving around the temple court, the synagogue center. You see, when you see every action that they take, it is disgraceful to God. It's dishonoring to their father. But what does Eli do? Nothing. On one occasion, he speaks out to them about their wayward ways. But then he continues his service. And I think that's the essence of the message, isn't it? You've got Hannah who's standing tall. And ultimately you see God speaks that He will not honor the sons of Eli. And you see how the tall fall. Samuel went on to be faithful even though he was in the court with Eli. He came to know something about God, and he listened to God's voice as God called out to him in chapter 3. And very clearly, he's been thereafter walking the way of the Lord, doing the things, even at times that didn't seem right. The people wanted a king. It's amazing how, when you have a democratic process, sometimes you can make democratic mistakes. And the people were clamoring for a king, and they had one. It was called Yahweh Jehovah God. Wasn't enough, at least from their perspective. But God, He honored their request. And Samuel, in his faithfulness, then ordained Saul to be the king of God's people. Wow. And for many battles and to several years, Saul is faithful. He's the leader that the people wanted. With all the warnings that were given, they still ordained him king. And yet there was this one command that God gave. Saul, I'd like for you to go and destroy all of the Amalekites, their fatted calves, their best of the lambs, their gold, their silver. Destroy it all. And you know how it is sometimes in life we think we know best. We apply our human logic. Why waste this gold and silver by destroying it? We could use it to feed the poor. Well, why destroy these fatted calves and the best of the lambs? That they could be used for sacrifice. And God said, but destroy them all. And He didn't. He kept the best of the fatted calves. He allowed some of the Amalekites to live. He took their gold and silver. Oh, let me say it a different way. He was disobedient to our God. I've met a lot of smart people in life. Some not as smart as they thought they were. It's kind of like in New England. We live in the heart of where academia reigns. There are 52 colleges and universities within a 20-mile radius of downtown Boston. Some of the best schools in the world, I say that loosely. I mean, you've got Harvard and MIT and Boston College and Boston University and Northeastern. And some of you, later on, you might think about Berklee School of Music. We have a church plant in downtown Boston, and every musician on the platform are students at Berklee. They're not as good as you, but they're pretty good. So in the context of that whole experience, we've got this church plant that's going on, and what's happening in Boston, and people who think they're so smart. And the reality is, if you walk through the streets, you would look around and say, they've got everything. And I want to be clear here. They have everything but Jesus. Let me introduce you to two more families. You need to get to know them. The first is Zechariah and Elizabeth. You know, it's a great story because an angel comes and tells them well, this is great. Men, listen up. Here's the cue for you. You've got something to take home here. The angel, Gabriel's talking to Zechariah and telling him that his wife Elizabeth's going to bear a child. And Zechariah can't quite figure all of this out. How can this be, Lord? I'm an old man and she is well along in years. Then you notice what he didn't say? Yeah, she's not an old woman like me. I'm an old man. He didn't say that. He said, and she's well along in years. Just simply to implicate that she's beyond the age of childbearing, and yet God heard their prayers as many years as they were offered, and through those prayers He brings to them a son, and He said, you'll call him John. And they did. And much like Samuel was the forerunner for Saul from the end of the kings to the beginning of the kings, or the judges to the kings, listen to him. You've got John. And you know what, John? John will be a forerunner too. John will usher in the presence of another. That same angel gave... That dude had some fun, didn't he? He goes to this older couple who's beyond childbearing and said, you're going to have a son. Then he goes to this virgin and says to her, by the way, you're going to have a son. Well, but we're not married. We've never known each other. God says you're going to have a son. And his name will be Jesus. I don't know about you, but that's a hard one to believe. Oh, not just in terms of truth. I'm talking about hard to believe in terms of obedience. And yet you have Joseph being obedient to God, and he takes Mary and he takes care of her, and a child is born. A child that has changed the world. He's the real king. Actually, he's the King of Kings. And this Jesus came because he had a mission. And do you know what the name Jesus means? Savior, deliverer. That's Jesus. His name is significant. It not only has meaning, it has purpose. And I want you to know today that in God's mission, He sent His Son through a virgin named Mary in order to allow the real king, the king from the heavens, to reign forever and ever and ever. That's what this church is all about. It's precisely what Center Christian Church mission happened to be. It's to let the whole world know, this county in particular, to understand that Jesus is the King of Kings and He came to save us from our sin. It doesn't matter what your story is. You may think you've got a pretty good one. I'm just telling you, you still need Jesus. You may think that your story is so bad that God can't forgive you. I want you to understand clearly that Jesus came to save you. And so I'm looking at a lot of faces. I'm sorry I don't know your name. Let me clarify, my name's Danny, not Horse. But every face has a name. Every name has a story. Whether it's Elkanah and Hannah, whether it's Eli and his sons, whether it's Joseph and Mary. This church extends an invitation to you today to come and confess Jesus as your King, your Lord, your Savior. That's the best story that will ever be told. The one where He sees us with bended knee, bowed before the King, giving our lives to Him. This decision today is about a story, yours, and what God has done to bring it to closure. Let's stand and sing. If you're outside of Christ, please come. Acknowledge Him by name.